Hello and welcome to Templar Night TV. Now, this is a fiendishly complicated topic to discuss, but it's one that's very popular with some Templar theorists. So let me try and unpack it for you. Basically, where the Knights Templar, what are termed Johannite, in other words, did they worship John the Baptist over and above Jesus Christ? Did they believe, as it were, that John the Baptist was the true Messiah, and why is that even important? Now, of course, it's eye roll time for mainstream historians, and I apologize to them, but we are going to look at this theory, which, as I say, is of huge interest to a lot of people. So let's go back to the Bible story of when Jesus and John the Baptist first meet. John the Baptist is leading up an already existing sect of some description. He's baptizing people in the River Jordan, and then suddenly Jesus turns up unannounced. Now, there's two accounts in the Synoptic Gospels. One has John the Baptist baptizing Jesus in an almost nonchalant, almost disinterested way, whereas the other one has John the Baptist kind of recognizing Jesus as the Messiah, and even the voice of God booming out of the sky in recognition of his son down below getting baptized. But it's always intrigued me to kind of figure out what really was going on here, because John the Baptist clearly has his own sect. Jesus turns up with what must have been a smaller sect, and John the Baptist, we're told, agrees to decrease while allowing Jesus to increase. But nevertheless, there's a suggestion in the story that John the Baptist isn't entirely sure that Jesus is the Messiah. Also, does Jesus take over John the Baptist's sect, or does he create his own? Some people have suggested that Jesus created his own entirely independent sect. But in a sense, why wouldn't he take over John the Baptist's sect if he's supposed to be the real Messiah? Now, we're then told that John the Baptist is arrested by the ruler of Galilee, Herod Antipas, because he's criticized the marriage of Herod Antipas to Herodias, who had been married to the king's half-brother previously. Anyway, he's imprisoned. He's basically imprisoned on trial for his life. But from his prison cell, he sends out his followers to interrogate Jesus further. Now, why does he do that? I mean, wasn't the skies opening up and the voice of God booming out enough proof for him that Jesus was the Messiah? But we are definitely given the impression that John the Baptist has lingering doubts about Jesus. And I find it very suspicious that we then have this story that kind of backdates John the Baptist recognizing Jesus to when he was a fetus. So we have this story of pregnant Mary, pregnant with Jesus, meeting pregnant Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist. Two pregnant women meeting each other, and the fetus of John the Baptist is said to have recognized the fetus of Jesus and danced for joy in his mother's womb, presumably a quite uncomfortable experience for Elizabeth. But I just feel that there's an attempt here to backdate this because there are doubts about what John the Baptist really thought about Jesus Christ. So later writers have to, as it were, reaffirm his recognition, taking it right back to the fetal stage. So does the sect of John the Baptist then totally disappear? Well, here's the intriguing thing. No, it doesn't. Because there is a sect called the Mandaeans, they go under other names, but the Mandaeans, or Johannite, who continue to venerate John the Baptist as the true Messiah. They still exist in Iraq and other parts of the Middle East today. And they certainly existed at the time that the Knights Templar were in the Holy Land and in the Middle East. And it's entirely possible that the Knights Templar came into contact with the Mandaeans. Now, of course, what some of these theorists argue is that the Templars were influenced by these Johannites, by these Mandaeans, and came to doubt themselves that Jesus Christ was truly the Messiah. Now, one of the earliest theorists for this Johannite-Templar connection is Madame Blavatsky. Now, she is a 19th century spiritualist, mystic, and author. She's definitely a Marmite personality. You either love her or hate her. And she was the founder of something called Theosophy. Now, she popularized this idea of the Johannite connection to the Knights Templar, and the Knights Templar, as it were, being guardians of a much older creed than Christianity. But where did she get these ideas from? She talked about having dreams, prophecies, meeting shaman, and so on. So it's the kind of evidence that obviously mainstream historians would completely discard. But let's run with Blavatsky's view for a moment. She believes that the first Templar Grand Master, Hugh de Payne, was basically inducted into the Johannite cult by a man called Theoclites, who was, as it were, the kind of Grand Master of the Johannites, and that from the very start, the Templars were, as it were, the guardians of the Johannite flame. As I say, Blavatsky used telekinesis and clairvoyance and other unorthodox methods to formulate her theories, but nevertheless, what she wrote has kind of seeped into a lot of Templar literature over the last 100+ years. It's very influential, this idea of the Templars
What
being
do the Mandaeans think of Jesus, kind of talking about their connections to Christianity, and what do they think of the major figure of that religion?
I guess the short answer is that they're not really fans. Yeah, they have a negative view of Jesus that compares to their negative view of the Jewish creator God and the Spirit. Jesus is viewed as an apostate Mandaean. He also takes the blame for some later developments, basically Byzantine Christianity, the practice of celibacy among monks and nuns and things of that sort. Whether it's fair to blame Jesus for those things or not is a different question, but he gets the blame in some Mandaean texts. But he's viewed as essentially an apostate from Mandaeism, somebody who was connected with John the Baptist, but essentially betrayed the trust and went and did his own thing, which involves, among other things, baptism in non-living water, not running water, and so a different kind of baptism. And so the Mandaeans have their own version of some stories that we also find in the New Testament, and some of the ones connected with John the Baptist and his parents are interesting, both in that they intersect with, let's say, the Lucan infancy story, but also have some distinctives and go in a completely different direction that makes you wonder, did they have their own separate tradition, and how, if so, for how long? But when it comes to Jesus, the stories become more recognizable for those familiar with the New Testament. And, for instance, one famous story in the Mandaean Book of John, which of course is John the Baptist, it's not like their Gospel of John, but one story in there tells of the baptism of Jesus, and Jesus essentially pleads with John to baptize him and promises a number of things, including that if he baptizes him and makes him his disciple, Jesus promises to mention John in his book, which is a fun little twist there. And John is hesitant not because he feels he needs to be baptized by Jesus, but precisely because he doesn't trust Jesus and thinks he's up to no good, and this can't lead anywhere good if he baptizes him. And so eventually a letter comes from the light world, the world above, which is the Mandaean equivalent of the heavenly voice you get in the Gospels. And it basically says, not, this is my beloved son, but, you know, John, go ahead and baptize the deceiver. Right? You're not accountable for whatever follows.
Remote viewing is the military term for viewing a target with the mind's eye. Remote viewings are conducted under double-blind conditions, meaning that the target assigner and the viewers are unaware of what they are viewing. They are simply given an arbitrary number. The Future Forecasting Group was recently given the target number H506B3T9. That was the only information they had. It was only after the viewing that they learned what the target was.
Drum roll, please. You guys were looking at the Rapture, the global religious event of an unknown time.
The target was the split rapture event. In Christianity, it is the rapture, when believers are taken into heaven while the rest of humanity suffers the tribulation. The raw material calls this event the harvest. and says it happens every 25,000 years when those who have spiritually evolved ascend to a higher dimension, while those who don't are reincarnated back into the third dimension. According to Christians who believe in it, to be raptured, you must believe in Christ. The raw material is from an exhaustive channeling experiment that took decades to achieve, and the source claims to be a group of entities known as the Council of Nine, or Ra, the same Ra of ancient Egypt, here to assist mankind in their spiritual evolution. And the FFG team saw all of this in their viewing. To see if they are all getting the same data, remote viewers work in teams, and they all saw the event spanning from what was described as ancient Egypt or the Middle East into the present day. They saw an event that required one's loyal submission or worship to higher beings. They saw a major event happening in the heavens. They saw what appeared to be a major cataclysmic event tied to the Great Year of roughly 25,000 years, something that many researchers predict and the raw material confirms. And they all saw non-human entities behind this event. Riordan even saw a Council of Nine and a blue bird, which is how they describe themselves in the raw material. They saw what appeared to be another planet, one with an inhospitable atmosphere that required domed cities. They saw underground bases, and they saw the infamous gray aliens.
And then we're seeing one of these guys again. Continuation of a species. They got to do what they got to do. No regrets. But the sense is like, help us. Like, they need our help. Again, this idea of like a manifest destiny to inhabit a corporeal being.
According to UFO research, the most common story is that the Greys destroyed their own planet and came to Earth to experiment on mankind in a desperate attempt for survival. No longer able to reproduce sexually, they experiment on mankind with genetic science and technology to sustain their own species. And according to the raw material, there are two factions of non-humans on Earth. One is on the path of service to others, here to help humanity spiritually liberate itself, and the other is on the path of service to self, here to enslave humanity for their own selfish needs. Allgaier saw several images of how the soul is attached to the human body, how it is removed, and how these creatures were attempting to manipulate the process with a Neuralink. And practically the whole team saw barbaric experiments on mankind with brain chips, animal mutilations, animal-human hybrids, and transhumanist hardware, as if creating some sort of human Frankenstein was the only way for their species to survive. They could be viewing the biblical mark of the beast, and also the Orion group from the raw material, otherwise known as the Greys, who seek to use humanity for their own selfish needs. They saw UFOs, major events in the sky, and a mass exodus. It is interesting to note that Elon Musk wants to give everyone brain implants and says we need to escape the planet. President Trump created Space Force, and a year later, former Israeli space chief Hayim Eshed said that extraterrestrials exist, and Trump knows about it. It is also important to note that I am seeing their remote viewing through my own filter, but you can watch the full presentation for yourself and draw your own conclusions at futureforecastinggroup.com. Reporting for InfoWars, this is Greg Reese.